First rule of presenting, never anger the video people. They will draw a giant dick on your forehead in virtual reality. Cool. Okay, so hi there. I'm Brendan O'Connor. Hopefully you're here to see this talk as opposed to all the other cool talks going on. I'm doing Reticle, dropping an intelligent Fbomb, which is kind of a follow-up to some work I did at ShmooCon, but with a lot more really interesting stuff. And it has, military and dancing cats in it. So what do you want? So I'm Brendan O'Connor. I run my own security consultancy, like about half of you, give or take. Weirdly, I'm also a rising second-year law student at the University of Wisconsin Law School, because it turns out that doing law school doesn't take very much time, which is kind of cool. So you can actually do real work on the side, even though you're a full-time law student. And it's way more fun that way, because you can scare the hell out of all the other law students. They're like, you hack things? Yes, I do. Isn't that illegal? Yeah, you should probably go back and take criminal procedure again. So it's always good times. So in terms of real work, I've done work for DARPA. I've taught military network warfare classes, which is great fun. And I'm always looking for work, so go ahead and ping me. As a young entrepreneur, there really are no levels to which I will not sink. So always good to know. By the way, of course, I don't speak for anybody, least of all this researcher's sponsor, who I'll get to on the next slide, but I certainly don't speak for the University of Wisconsin either, just in case you thought I did for some reason. As a side note, I'll take questions at any time during the talk, so just wave your hands if I don't notice you somehow, and unless I actually point at you and say I'm ignoring you. So, just first a note of thanks to half this researcher's sponsor, which is DARPA Cyber Fasttrack. Those of you who haven't heard of this, you should go check out Mudge's talks either at Black Hat from last year or at ShmooCon from early this year, both of which were great talks. The one from ShmooCon has some statistics. Basically, it's a way you can apply to DARPA and get DARPA money without having to do 300, not even joking, pages of bureaucracy and having to apply for special codes, and it's all a big pain in the butt. Cyber Fasttrack, you send in a maximum of 16 pages, they get back to you in 1 week. It's unbelievably fast. The final contract from the feds is 1 page long, which those of you who've worked for any major corporation know that that's completely insane, right? So this is a really good program, and major thanks to DARPA for allowing me to work on law school, pay for law school, and still do work that's actually meaningful instead of just being yet another bartender in Madison, Wisconsin, where I live. So this is the general roadmap of where we're going. We're going to talk about the problem we're actually trying to solve, talk about the hardware, talk about the software, and then talk about all the crazy stuff we get to do with this. Because basically we're going to work with disposable computing here. So this is the generalized problem, right? We have 3 different scenarios, all of which I think Fbomb has some hope for. Anybody recognize this photo? Not really. Okay, so this is one of the photos that they took using balloon mapping when BP imposed a no-fly zone over the BP oil spill so that you couldn't see how bad the oil was. All this kind of brownish stuff is actually oil floating off the beach. And this was an awesome thing, except the thing is that they're using a couple $1,000s of hardware on every balloon. And if somebody shoots it, like, the BP guards with guns who were using guns to keep people from doing exactly this trick, you've lost thousands of dollars of hardware, which is bad, right? And of course, environmental activists like Greenpeace don't usually have thousands of dollars to just throw around. Scenario 2 is just bad men with guns. Okay, so maybe this is just me, but I'm looking around the room and I'm doubting it. Whenever you come up to a big fence with 3 strands of concertina wire on the top, don't you really want to throw stuff over it just to see what they'll do? Or better yet, don't you really want to throw stuff into their little walled garden, as it were, pretty literally, and see what's on the other side, right? Crack into their networks, do all these other things. If you have to be within 50 yards to play with their Wi-Fi networks, and you can't get within 50 yards because of bad men with guns and large fences, then it's kind of a problem. And if you throw a computer in there, you're never, ever going to get it back, right? You just have to accept this off the thing. If you have to throw a netbook in there for $300 or $500, or throw a MacBook Pro in for $4,000, first of all, MacBook Pros are really hard to get a good loft with, but the second problem is that's really expensive, right? And it makes it very hard to do this as kind of a democracy in action type project, right? You want something that you can throw away and never have to do the incredibly embarrassing FBI thing from earlier this year when they had to go to judges and beg them to let them turn back on their $5,000 to $10,000 a piece GPS devices that they'd illegally stuck to a bunch of Muslim Americans' cars and get them back, right? That's a completely insane place to have to be, and yet that's where the government is. But we're way better than the government, right? So we're going to do something better. And the third scenario is something like Occupy, right? Where you have a problem where you need network infrastructure, and you need it to be cheap enough that when the cops come in, beat everyone up, and break all your stuff, you can just say, okay, and throw out a whole new layer of stuff. Right? So the Fbomb hardware and the entire disposable computing project I spent the last year on addresses all three of these scenarios in kind of different and I think relatively interesting ways. Because these guys are doing hard IT work in essentially a battlefield. So what we want, as I've mentioned, is we want cheap disposable computers. And how cheap? I want them to be less than $75. Because I'm a grad student, and I'm a grad student in the wrong department, and if you go to the law school and say, hey there, I'm doing security research, I would like you to give me some funding, just like my last university did when I was studying computer science. They kind of step backwards and say, you scare us, which might be the t-shirt I had on, but nonetheless, it's not a helpful response. So I want something I can actually fund as a grad student myself. The other reason we want it to be cheap is because we want to essentially democratize surveillance, right? We want to be able to democratize the area of technology. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is later. We want these to be deployable by untrained personnel. If I have to, if I want to throw something into a walled garden, but it has to be me because I have to sit there with a keyboard for half an hour typing commands in a very un-Hollywood way, right? In order to get the sucker to work, that's not going to be good. So we need something that you can just throw, like a grenade, basically, over a fence into places where bad people who hate you live and then play with them and mess with their mind. It needs to be reconfigurable post-deployment. So if I'm just going to have it, just pick it up and throw it, it's probably not going to be ideally targeted to the specific mission when I throw it. So there needs to be some kind of way I can have communication with it, which is made more complicated by the fact that we want these things to be dirt cheap and light and able to accept a pretty large impact if we're going to ballistically launch these suckers. So there needs to be some way to handle all those things. And we also need sufficient processing power. Yeah, we've got RFID chips now that are, half the size of a grain of sand, and they've got 2 transistors on board, right? Yay. You'll be able to do a lot of web cracking with that, or, more subtle things. We need an actual computer for all of this thing. So I want it to be the all-singing, all-dancing, right? I want it cheap, I want it brilliantly fast, and I want it right now. Because, that's our generation. So, yeah. The other thing I'd like to point out is that these are not an original design goal or new design goals for this project, right? The original UC Berkeley smart dust concept, right, that we'd have sensors everywhere and we'd live this entire connected life, said, well, we should just make them dirt cheap so we can put them everywhere. And then their original smart dust sensors were about yay big, and they cost $3,000 a piece. Even modern academic sensor networks cost between $200 and $500 per node, right? I worked at a great sensor network lab at Johns Hopkins for a couple of years, and the nodes are this big, and they cost several $100s and several $100s more to make them waterproof, because it turns out that's actually more expensive than the node itself. And then you still have to write in this completely ass-backwards dialect of C in order to actually communicate with them. This is clearly a bad thing. And also, just by the way, I really do mean I want to throw these suckers, right? Because Dan Kaminsky, if you were at Black Hat, said yesterday on stage that deploying hardware isn't fun, right? And it's never fun. Well, that's wrong. This is a great deployment method. I hope you wanted a t-shirt for hardware. And it gives me great pleasure every time I launch a computer into the sky. Cool, okay, I will avoid that. Yes, I've got lots of objects I will just be throwing randomly, so learn to duck. My students, when I was teaching network warfare, who were all military, you could tell the ones who'd been in combat and the ones who hadn't, because if they dived behind a computer and got scared, that meant I should probably stop doing this. The upgrade, however, was that I then got a marshmallow gun and started shooting them if they got questions right, except that I realized that it was actually the ones who were sleeping that I needed to attack, so instead I just bounced them off their foreheads, which worked really well. So marshmallow guns, and you can bring a marshmallow gun into a military base because they don't think it's a real gun, which is cool, because it's not. But that was a little concerning. So we're going to talk about the hardware. And the hardware is called Fbomb because 2 things. 1, it's hilarious. And 2, I used to work for DARPA, right? I have recently worked for DARPA. DARPA loves tortured acronyms. So we're going to have Fbomb. We'll explain what it means in a second. So it's the falling or ballistically launched object that makes backdoors, right? Because you could always use a good acronym. And so our design goals are, as I said, cheap. Less than $75, and if we can, less than 50, right? And we can less than 10 if you could do it, but I haven't found a way to. And that means not just the base hardware, but an entire mission's worth of hardware, right? All the extra stuff we need to glue onto it, the batteries, everything, should be less than $50 if we can pull it off. And it should be reconfigurable hardware for different types of sensors for different types of missions. That means if one thing, you're throwing it onto something mobile like a truck, you probably want GPS. If you're throwing it onto somebody's roof, you already know whose roof you're throwing it on, so you don't need GPS. And of course, in the land of Arduino, there's lots of different sensors, right? You can reconfigure an Arduino or any microcontroller into anything, but you can't do it cheaply. A wireless sensor for a Wi-Fi module for an Arduino costs $85. A wireless USB dongle, a really good one that you can do master mode on Amazon, is the size of my pinky fingernail and costs $8. So ultimately, even though I love Arduino, we have to abandon it. We have to use USB because otherwise we just can't keep the cost down, not effectively. And the other thing is, of course, we want it to be light enough to be flown on a UAV, which is one of my primary methods, and then dropped, kind of bombing style, right? Or thrown very, very hard. And it needs to be durable enough to land on things it wasn't intended to land on. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes, about how durable we're talking here. And we want it to be ubiquitous enough to be deniable. This means that we need to preempt supply line tracing. That is, that if I made a custom circuit board, right, whether I made my own order myself or I sent it to Dorkbox PDX and had them glom in with a bunch of other boards, eventually there's going to be a maker's mark somewhere in that printed circuit board that tells you which of the 10 factories that make custom circuit boards did it. And then they're going to go to them, and they're going to get a name. And if the name's yours or it's Dorkbot's, it's in general going to be somebody who doesn't want them to have their name, right? Because you just threw a computer into their highly classified environment. So that's a bad thing. So we want completely deniable hardware. We want only hardware you can buy in every country on the earth, preferably sold on Amazon and on eBay at the same time, so that you can completely deny that Brendan pwned you. Or if you're the government, that the NSA pwned you, right? We want it, well, it could be anyone who knows what a transistor is pwned us. That's a much better scenario to be in. So there's a few other good concepts in this space right now, right? This is becoming cooler. So the question I get a lot, well, why not use the pony plug? Well, how many of you have actually bought a pony plug? A few of you, right? And they cost $500, right? $200 minimum for the used ones. As much as $1,200 for essentially what is one of these, and this is the Shiva Plug Dev Kit. It costs $99 online. They'll charge you an extra $1,100 to stick it inside a power strip, which is really cool, but is way outside my budget, especially if you're going to be deploying tens or hundreds of these suckers and you're a poor grad student or you're Greenpeace or you're Occupy Wall Street, right? It doesn't work. The pros, of course, it has a nice SD slot on board, and it's running on the Marvell Shiva chip, which is a great chip. It's a great design, and it uses pretty low power, which is pretty cool. But the cons are it's incredibly expensive. And the cons for using even just a native Shiva dev kit, it's also pretty expensive. It's $100, which is still outside our price range. And this power supply right behind that little thing is a pain to take apart. So if you want to run this on batteries, easier to do almost anything else, right? It's easier just to use an inverter than to try and subvert this thing's power supply. The printed circuit board is pretty integrated with the power supply for, I'm sure, very good reasons if you're Marvell. But I like this chip, but we can't use the pony plug. What? Right, okay, yeah, that is the older version, but it's still the version they sell as pony plug. The older pony plug, I should say. Okay, well, that's cool. I mean, yeah. But it's $100, right? Plus shipping. By the way, exactly, $120 by the time you get it. And that's way outside our range of $75, including everything. Because remember, the Pony Plug doesn't have Wi-Fi. It has SD card slots, but no onboard storage, right? So you still need to put a lot of stuff into it before you get anything out of it. There's also this, the Mini Poner, which is a great thing, right? Because first of all, it's about 1.5 inches square, which is pretty cool. And it has Wi-Fi built in, and it's really awesome. And the problem is that it has 32 megs of RAM and a processor so slow you can only run OpenWRT, which is a really great distribution in terms of mastering the technical achievement of getting it to run on something this slow. It doesn't give you a lot of power. Most of the software you want to work doesn't work on OpenWRT, right? And especially with only this little tiny amount of RAM, half of which has to be dedicated to keeping the Wi-Fi up, you can't do advanced things like Reaver or other kind of brute force attacks efficiently at all on this. So even though I love this form factor and I love just the whole project, I mean, these things, the base hardware is $25, which is right in our price range. We can't actually use this particular module. There's also, as the third alternative, the Wasp, the Wireless Aerial Surveillance Project, which you may have seen at 2 different DEF CONs or 1 Black Hat, or they've been around, right? this is awesome, right? Because it's a flying thing. It has a base station for cell phones in its belly. It can sniff all your Wi-Fi. It can crack everything. It phones home on 3G networks. The problem is that this costs $8,000, and there's only one of them. And it's in an abandoned Army target drone. And, okay, so I'm originally from Montana, right? I live in Wisconsin now, but I'm originally from Montana. If I see something circling overhead, I shoot it, because that's what people from Montana do, right? Well, it doesn't look like an eagle, or anyway, the game ranger's a long ways away. Blam, right? It's not good. And that is, unfortunately, what you have to do with the Wasp, right? Your time on target, because it's fixed wings, so it can't land without basically a runway, a short runway. You have to just circle overhead of whoever you're poning. Ultimately, you have a real problem, right? Humans have evolved for thousands of years to look for circling buzzards, as it means that the birds think you're going to die, right? And so we have this built-in thing of disliking stuff circling overhead. So as much as I love the Wasp project, we actually can't use it for this. So this is what we ultimately came up with. This is the Fbomb version 1. And it's based on the Pogo Plug. Just a second. So it's based on the Pogo Plug, which is the Shiva core, but the difference is the Pogo Plug, or even though they originally sold for $150, have failed massively in the market. And so you can get them on Amazon for $25 consistently, pretty much as many as you want. I bought 10 at once, had no problem getting all for $25, including shipping. Half of them on Prime, right, which is awesome. So the main board is a Marvell Shiva core. It's running 1.2 gigahertz. It's got Ethernet on board, which we don't care about. It has 4 USB ports, which we very much do care about. You can get the whole thing, fill it with Wi-Fi modules, add some flash storage. You can even screw around with eSATA if you want to, and do the whole thing for less than $50, which is pretty awesome. This board is about the size of a piece of bread, about 3.5 inches by 4 inches by half an inch, which is pretty cool. And as I mentioned, the power supply, this is the connectors over here, this just takes a regulated 5 volts. Which apparently the new ones do as well from the actual Shiva dev kit. But as I mentioned before, the original Shiva didn't. You needed basically to run AC in. So regulated 5 volts, you can get a 25-cent 7805 chip and run regulated 5 volts off of a couple batteries. And that's awesome for us. How many of you know the capacity of a D battery? Anybody know? How many of you guys have used a D battery for anything in the last couple of years? Like 10 of you, right? And half of you probably have small children who needed it for those write-in things, right? D batteries have gone out of style because we're all green now, right? We're not supposed to use disposable batteries because we just throw them away and that pollutes the environment. We're throwing away the whole computer. We totally don't care. And a D battery has 18 watt-hours as standard capacity off a standard alkaline D battery. That's a huge amount of power. And therefore, we run a few of these things. You can run this for 24 or 48 hours off of just a few D batteries, which is pretty awesome. The other thing, for those of you who care about this, D batteries are still made in the United States by fellow Americans, right? Lithium-ion batteries are not made in the United States. It's illegal to make them in the United States. But Rayovac D batteries are made in northern Wisconsin, and AA's are actually made in Madison, where I live, which is kind of cool. And the 2 Wi-Fi dongles, well, why do we have 2, right? Surely you only need 1 to do pen testing. Well, it's because, remember, we're going to use the minimum viable hardware. And you notice that there's not a 3G connection on this. The Fbomb design concept, what we exploited for Reticle, is go crack your way into somebody else's network and use that for a backhaul. Okay? So we're going to just basically send you out there and tell you to find somebody who lets you borrow their phone forever, and preferably don't tell them, right? And that's how we're actually going to use, when we build Reticle, the software concept of this, that is going to be the first major challenge, is how do we get that part to work? You had a question? Okay. Unfortunately, they come in a bright pink case. So unless you're invading a Hello Kitty store, not so subtle. But, right, but the new version that they've changed colors to actually has a less powerful board and costs more money on Amazon. Whereas this version is the version that you can get for $25 and is really powerful. So you want the big pink version, but luckily it's like 2 screws and you can turn it into whatever you want. For instance, this, right, in that cute little 3D printed case. This, with everything on it, including the power connector from which I can suck for my Parrot drone, the $300 Amazon toy drone, weighs 107 grams. So it's very light. It doesn't take anything else. You just add a couple batteries to it. And it's also small enough you can fit it inside almost anything else. So this is actually a big carbon monoxide detector I got on eBay for $5. Ripped out all of its guts, including the radioactive bits, stuck it inside, added back in an AC power supply, but a smaller one, and hid it inside someplace that I won't tell you because I think they'll be pissed at me, for several weeks without anyone ever noticing. How many of you guys have ever checked your carbon monoxide detectors to make sure that they're still carbon monoxide detectors? Yeah, that's what I thought, right? No one looks at this. You want it in something that people will ignore. I've hidden these things in Triscuits boxes at the back that are stale and marked expired 3 years ago. Also a great place. Anything kind of moldy, great place. Keep it out of the refrigerator because it turns out those are a Faraday cage. But otherwise, places people to ignore work great in offices, right? And it turns out, after the talk I did on this at ShmooCon, the International Spy Museum, who are cool guys and do mostly a lot of Soviet-era spy technology, thought, this is great, can we have it? So now they have it. Which is the other thing. If you make up stupid acronyms, random people will call you and ask you to give them things, which sounds better than, or is better than it sounds. So, yeah, I've been mentioning the very durable impact, right? And I showed you the 3D printed case that actually works pretty well. I threw it off my balcony on the 4th story several times and it survived just fine, continuing to record data, no problems, because there's no moving parts. But what if we want to really injure something? So this is the soundboard system at Sector 67, the hackerspace in Madison, where I do a lot of my work. And it's not there anymore, but back here there were a couple Pogo Plugs that used to live on top of that very large amplifier for our big sound system, right? And it's a cool place, and it works really well until one day I was messing with something, and this happened. So that is what it looks like when you drop 300 pounds of hardware on your foot, and in this case, on top of one of the Pogo Plugs, which still worked, which is awesome. So it can survive a 150-pound amplifier plus a bunch of other crap dumping on top of it and still continue to record data and continue to work, which is pretty awesomely durable, right? And that's in the original pink case. We can make better cases for it, right? You can put it in a small Pelican case or whatever you'd like. So we get the durability we're looking for out of all of this. Unfortunately, Sector has had a good idea bell that you ding when somebody's had a really great idea. After this particular thing, they installed a fail horn, which is one of those horrible little clown horns, like ree ree, which they proceeded to honk every time I walked in for a month as punishment, even after I'd fixed the thing. So support your local hackerspace, but yeah, happens. So now we're going to talk about Reticle, the actual software we're going to use, which is what DARPA actually funded. So a reticle is a bomb site, in essence, right? And so if we're going to drop F-bombs, we need some way to target them. We need a command and control system so we can do actual brains, right? Brains, they're not just for munching anymore. And so this is the project that DARPA found. They said, basically, yeah, we think it's a cool idea to figure out some way to build, in essence, an open source botnet in order to control these things, right? Let's see how much of a botnet we can build pretty quickly and writing as little code as possible, which is the Reticle project. So again, for Reticle, we want the minimal viable hardware, and again, we're not going to bother to bring any Wi-Fi with us. The Reticle software needs to be able to break into somebody's Wi-Fi and work from there. Now, in most urban areas, you don't actually have to use anything other than open Wi-Fi. If you don't believe me, go look at the Wiggle project, which documents the thousands and thousands of access points, even just in Madison, kind of a small town, comparatively. So we get away without having to break it in. If you don't mind breaking some laws, then, of course, just bust into somebody else's network and go from there. It works reasonably efficiently if you've met the Reaver project, for instance. The next thing we want is we want deniable deployment. So again, we want hardware you can't trace. But we also want it so that if somebody comes along this, right, the traditional underling security guard who comes along with his M16 and says, what is this pink thing? We want you not to be able to figure out who's attacking you. So that means a couple things. One, all the data, all the logs, everything have to be encrypted on disk. And as any cryptologist will tell you, this means that we have to not have the keys on board. Because if we have the keys on board, then it's not really encrypted. It's basically obfuscated. So that's a problem for something that has no screen. And remember, we have to have the guys in the field not know how to type keys in, right? If UG can throw T-shirt at person, right, then they need to be able to deploy this. And that turns out UG is not a cryptologist most of the time. So again, this is the deployment method. It also means that we need to have encrypted communications, and more than just encrypted communications SSL style, we need to be resistant to traffic analysis. If I go, every 30 seconds you send a ping back to nsa.gov. Must be the NSA who dislikes me, right? That's a bad sign, right? We want that not to be able to happen. So we need to be able to obfuscate our communications such that the people on the local network can't see who we're talking to, and hopefully it'll be inconsistent who we're talking to. And it also needs to have no central command and control server, because otherwise this will suffer the same fate as all those virus-born botnets, right? VeriSign revokes the domain, gives it to the FBI, and then they own your botnet. And then they make fun of you for a year using their special website for their DNS servers. Or they just find you have a central IP address and go wham, and then your whole botnet is over, right? This is bad. We shouldn't like this. And luckily, there's a couple examples of better botnets like Aileron and Storm that don't have a central command server. So we know this is possible. It's just that it's not easy. You can't go on GitHub and download a botnet yet. But in about a day, you will be able to. And we need to also be resistant to node compromise. So if somebody actually does find this, gets around the encryption, is able to take it apart without killing the power or cold boots it or whatnot, there needs to be some way that we can say, I don't like that node anymore and take it offline, which sounds easy. It is easy. We've had the technology for decades. And how many of your browsers actually use a certificate revocation list, which is the same method? None of your browsers, because no browser does this. So we're going to do things the right way, because why not? It's our own system. So things that are not design goals. We're not going to build a mesh network. This looks like mesh network hardware. We're not going to, because even though mesh networks are wonderful, it's hard. It's hard to do right. It's hard to be reconfigurable. And more importantly, again, we're not going to lay these things down in a cute little pattern that makes them able to all talk to each other. We don't want to have to spend a lot of time making sure they're all in range to build a consistent mesh, right? So we're going to use the internet as our mesh network instead. So we're not going to build a normal mesh network, even though they're wonderful. And then we also don't care to have synchronous command and control. This means if I say go to 50 of these nodes, they're not all going to go at the same time. This is not going to work like marching orders. And the reason we're not is because it, as you know, if you've did the whole cloud computing talk that was here just before me, it's really hard to get it all to work. And if you relax those constraints a little bit, you say 30 seconds or a minute is fine, we can get a lot more power for a lot less cost and time if we just say, it doesn't need to be synchronous command and control. The thing that this does kill is it means you cannot SSH into these nodes, not if you really want to have anything to do for the rest of the afternoon, because it takes forever. So you win some, you lose some. So these are the problems to solve. We're going to solve a whole bunch of problems and eventually fill up this slide. The first problem is we need to get enough hardware to test performance on these embedded systems, because if we're going to use crappy little hardware, it turns out it has different performance than my 8-core Mac Pro, which could simulate 50 of these things on one processor. Luckily, we have a great solution for that. We're going to build a clone army, and we're going to do it because DARPA is funding this, which is wonderful. Again, seriously, go do Cyber Fasttrack. It makes your life so much easier. So I built a whole little clone army. I put little Malice Afterthought stickers on them. I gave them all cute names. And now they all have blinking lights. Problem solved. So the solution to this problem is simple. It's DARPA. So first real problem. How do we have encrypted storage without storing the key on disk? The solution for this for full disk encryption on laptops is, of course, type the password in at boot. We don't want to do that. Imagine you're getting, imagine if it's a smoke grenade, right? And you've got X grunt in the field, and he goes, okay, boss, I'm ready to throw this. Wait, I have to unpack my monitor and my keyboard, sit down and type in the very long encrypted password, and then eventually, okay, boss, now we can throw it, right? Not good, not useful, hard to remember, hard to do correctly. If you don't have a monitor, you're never going to get it entered correctly. You'll never know when it actually worked. There has to be some better way to do this. So how are we going to do it? We need essentially grenade-style key management. There needs to be pull the pin, go, right? Or stick the pin in, pull the pin, go. Something very simple, right? Count to 3. Don't count to 2 unless you're counting to 3. Yes, that's the holy hand grenade of Antioch, etc. So the original solution I had for this was really cool, really technical, used lots of hot new buzzwords. I was going to use the teensy microcontroller, which is half the size of a USB stick, and it can emulate an HID device, just like the new Arduino Leonardo can, and then type in. Doesn't work. It totally should work. There's no technical reason it shouldn't work in terms of the teensy. The reason it doesn't work in reality is one of those you go to war with the hardware you were able to buy on Amazon for really cheap instead of the hardware you want problems. In this case, the Fbomb doesn't expose a terminal to the normal USB inputs. So if you even if you plugged a USB monitor and a USB keyboard into it, you're not actually typing on a normal terminal because its terminals are all over serial. And due to weirdness between Pogo Plug and Arch Linux, I wasn't able to get a terminal to actually expose. So even though the teensy is really, really cool, can't actually use it for this. So we went with plan B, called cheating, which is we fill a USB key with randomized data and use it as a key file instead. So you still get the same scenario. So when we do this, you turn on a Pogo plug, you plug in a USB key when the light starts blinking, you pull the USB key out when the light stops blinking, which is about 1 second, and then you throw it. That's it, right? We have to use the blinky lights on it. Everybody understands the general blinking lights concept of operation. Very simple. So it's pretty much the same. It's not quite as good as pull the pin, throw, but pretty much on the same plane. So we've solved the second problem with the USB drive. Third problem we mentioned before, we have to be resistant to traffic analysis. Because if basically a nerd with a PhD can say, well, Shannon's information theory says that the NSA pwned you, that's bad, right? That's a complete disaster at that point for diplomatic reasons. Or if you're Greenpeace, knowing that you're being stalked by Greenpeace before they decide to unfurl their banner on the side of your ship is always bad news for Greenpeace, right? And the solution to this, as you've probably guessed, is Tor. Tor is wonderful. I don't need to talk about Tor, except that we're not just going to use it for traffic obfuscation. We're also going to use hidden services, because this allows all of the Fbomb nodes to export services that aren't reachable by a normal IP address. This means that we can publish their names without fear of backlash. Because if I publish an IP address and say, oh yeah, there's a hidden node at 74.23.nsa.gov, right, or an IP address, sorry, then everybody goes, shoot that pink thing that suddenly landed on our roof a couple days ago, right? It narrows the focus. Whereas if I'm exposing only a hidden service, then even if you're sitting right next to it, you have no idea that you're talking to yourself. You have to go through 6 Tor intermediate nodes in order to talk to it. So this solves a bunch of problems very easily and in a very well understood way. The downside, of course, is, oh my God, the lag is horrible when you're working with Tor. Especially if you have 8 of these suckers all exposing hidden services in your closet, like I showed you before. So don't do SSH. Those of you who've done SSH over Tor know not to do SSH. And remember that it's twice as bad as a normal Tor connection because you're going through 6 nodes instead of 3. So again, we're going to throw out synchronous control. Debugging was really hard, but you don't care in the field because you're never going to SSH to these nodes in the field. You're going to give them a mission in a way we'll talk about later. Next problem, we need easy local storage, right? We need some way to be able to store tasks. We need to be able to store other nodes in your botnet, right? We need to be able to store all the data we've just pulled out, right? All the goodies you actually wanted from that bad man with guns. And we're going to use CouchDB because it's wonderful. Setting aside the whole SQL versus NoSQL thing, this is generally a bunch of unstructured data, right? So generally SQL doesn't work very well. And Couch has some other cool things. It has MapReduce that I can write in JavaScript because I really wanted to add yet another language to my cyber Fasttrack. I got up to about 6 during the course of this project. And the government reviewers were all going, why are you writing it in so many languages? You make our heads hurt. I go, because it's hilarious. So JavaScript MapReduce, which is awesome. It also is very RESTful, obviously, so it does all those nice web things. And it has a built-in HTTP server, which is cool. So that means you can actually expose all the data sets you're collecting over HTTP and then expose that over Tor, right, over the hidden services. So we're going to store tasks in CouchDB, we're going to store our exfiltrated data, and we're going to store a list of friendly nodes that we know about for replication in CouchDB. So the next problem is indeed, well, how are we going to send data from one node to another? Where's the peer-to-peer part coming in this? Because without peer-to-peer, we have a central command structure somewhere, and then we are screwed, as noted above. CouchDB also solves this problem, right? CouchDB is wonderful. It's the all-singing, all-dancing database. CouchDB will actually do replication from database to database over HTTP in a pretty simple, incredibly fault-tolerant way. And since it is just HTTP, you can torture the HTTP protocols all the same way you do with normal web traffic. You can throw them through proxies, you can run them through Tor, you can do all sorts of evil things to it. It's a great solution. The other thing that CouchDB gives us at this point, excuse me, is that it also has hooks for every commit. So you get a nice, very easily exposed way from Couch, instead of having to poll it saying, is there new stuff yet? Is there new stuff yet? Is there new stuff yet? Couch just says, bing, look, I got a new task. Do what you want with it. So at this point, we can write a pretty simple script that just acts as mommy. Whenever a task comes in, it runs it, and it actually verifies all the encryption keys on the tasks, makes sure the task was sent by somebody authorized, verifies group identity. All of this can be run on a pretty dirt simple JavaScript thing we embed in CouchDB. It makes everything much easier to work with. And then we need encrypted revocable communications, right? So as you'd probably guess, we pretty much want SSL. We want SSL done the right way, not with a certificate authority. We want SSL because it has encrypted and revocable communications. And the solution should be CouchDB, if you look at the box, right? Well, this should be able to solve this problem as well, because it says, hey, we support client and server SSL certificates. Funny story about that. CouchDB has supported client SSL certificates, that is, when you send it to the person you're trying to talk to, excuse me, for almost a year now. They added a support in October of 2011. So I booted it right up, and yep, they can serve an SSL certificate. They can send a client SSL certificate for replication. And if you tell them to verify a client SSL certificate, it crashes and dumps its core. Yeah, it's horrifying. And it did this repeatedly, and it did this on several different operating systems. And so I finally did what you should really do, and what the docs always say you should do. Go on IRC and go to hash CouchDB on Freenode and ask them, hey, what's going on? And they said, no one's ever used that before. So what do you mean no one's ever used that? So apparently this one dev got a rogue hair and just decided to implement client support, excuse me, client SSL support. And literally, according to the CouchDB devs, as of March 2012, no one had ever used client certificate support. So they didn't know it didn't work. So I filed a bug. The bug is still there. That's a screenshot from yesterday. It's marked as low priority. They don't care, which is too bad. They don't care because nobody uses it, because no one uses client certificates, right? And all of you guys in the security community, you know why no one else uses client certificates. They're really hard to manage, right? We don't care because we're going to manage them with that nice USB key. But they care because they're like, there's just nobody calling for it. So there's been one other person who's posted I want that too, and that's it. So they'll fix this when they fix this. Now, several of you might be asking, hey, this is open source. Why don't you fix it? How many of you guys have ever coded an Erlang? How many of you guys have seen an Erlang error message even? Okay, they're horrifying. They make Objective-C, hell, they make Ada look very friendly. They make GDB error reports look readable by comparison. It's a great language, I'm told, by people who are language nerds. I love speaking different languages. I've had a few bad experiences with functional languages. I can't speak Erlang. I've tried very hard. So ultimately, we need somebody else to fix this for me. Hopefully one of you guys will have the Erlang bug, and you'll go and you'll fix this, and life will be wonderful. In the meantime, we're still stuck with this problem, right? We still need encrypted revocable communications. Tor does not provide this security. If you go on Tor's webpage, they will say, we don't provide the security you're looking for, Brendan. But there's a solution. It's Nginx. And it doesn't have to be Nginx. It can be any web server that can do a proxy for HTTP and impose SSL over it. But Nginx is really cool. It's really fast. It's very tiny. Doesn't use a lot of RAM. It works really well. And as soon as CouchDB pulls this or fixes this problem, we can pull it immediately out. What the other kind of random benefit that using Nginx as opposed to using CouchDB natively for SSL gives us is that it means that local scripts running on the Fbomb node itself don't need to use SSL. They don't need to worry about it. And then the firewall simply protects basically only people coming in. Is this a completely impervious solution? Could somebody break IP tables and then come in? Yeah, sure. I'm not going to try and pretend that we've eliminated all attack vectors. But I feel like breaking well-understood software we've used for decades is a better attack vector than just me screwing around with it, right? So Nginx is wonderful software if you need this kind of thing. And yes, Reticle nodes do check the certificate revocation lists. We don't just assume that it's going to be all fine. And we propagate certificate revocation lists through CouchDB, through the same peer-to-peer replication. So it works pretty well. So the last problem we've had, if you build a botnet, you need to have some way to do introductions, okay? Just like any peer-to-peer operation. And this is a problem, right? And every peer-to-peer system has come up with some different kind of solution. BitTorrent uses trackers, right? The tracker says, hey, I'm a centralized server that allows you to find your friends, and then you can go do decentralized things, right? The distributed hash table, the answer to the centralized server, still uses centralized servers for this. Basically, there's a set of long-running, long-uptime nodes that still will respond, because there needs to be somebody to tell you who your first friend is, right? Those of you who thought about clearance in the abstract know that you still need to have somebody to tell you who the other people with the secret code are, right? This problem came up in Cryptonomicon, if you like Neil Stephenson. So let's think about the threat model we have. Because I'm using Tor hidden services, I don't care if bad guys know the name of my system, right? I would care if I was using IP addresses, because that gives me a place I can go to. I don't care for Tor because of the way Tor works. So I don't mind publishing it in some place that everybody can see it. I do mind if I publish it and every last copy of it gets taken down. So it's more important to spray and pray, to borrow from the FPS genre, than to try and be discreet about this. So what we want, in essence, is a gossip protocol. We want something where, essentially, once the data's been pushed, every server in the world will take it on immediately, and then, essentially the horse is gone. So closing the barn door doesn't work, to use a Montana-ism. And just note, I couldn't use Twitter, right? Because several people have asked me, why not just use Twitter? That goes to everybody. Well, it really doesn't. It's still a centralized service, right? And so, sure, you're right. The FBI won't nuke Twitter. They'll just ask Twitter, hey, would you close that account? It's being used for criminal activity. And then they'll just close it, and then I don't get my introductions anymore. So we have to use a gossip protocol. It's non-optional. So I came up with 2 ideas. 1, how many of you guys have used Usenet in the last 2 years? A few of you. How many of you guys didn't use Usenet for porn in the last 2 years? There's 1 hand, 2 hands that I can see that used it for non-porn purposes. Erotica is porn. The internet is for porn. Usenet, Lord knows, is for porn. And the cool thing is that since, there's lots of illegal stuff, I've heard that there might be stolen software on the Usenets, right? And if our adversaries can't be bothered to hunt down all the illegal crap happening in alt.binaries.sheep.bad, then they are not going to track us down, right? Which is awesome. We can just throw our stuff into Usenet, and it gets distributed to every Usenet server in the world, and then we don't have to worry about it getting deleted by anybody, because they never seem to delete anything on Usenet. We've got at least a month before even the shortest servers start throwing away our data. And yes, there are Usenet servers that not only don't require a login, but don't track anything except an IP address. So if you come from an IP address, some Usenet servers will let you post. And if you manage to connect to a website without coming from any IP address, then you're awesome and I want to talk to you. So this works really well for us. So the text is a little bit small here, but what I actually did, I need to generate something so that servers like this won't just say, hey, this looks like spam. So I did what spammers do. I downloaded 5 or 6 old historical religious texts from Project Gutenberg. I select 20 lines at random out of them, and I stick an introduction note in the middle. And all I have is just the word reticle, so I can find it. You wouldn't need to have that. And then the onion name and HMAC 256. So it's actually signed so that I can say, someone is trying to screw with me, right? Preventing NSA from just going on there and flooding all my connections. And then we've got the onion node, and we can connect to that locally. Okay? We don't need to publish anything else because, again, it's our botnet. We know the ports, right? We know where, how to use the HUN services. We know which certificates to use because it's our thing. The other cool gossip protocol that has all the hot and sexiness right now is Bitcoin. And Dan Kaminsky proved last year during his Black Ops talk how you can make Bitcoin store anything using the incredibly awesome Sassman Memorial hack. He not only made Bitcoin have for all time, forevermore, have a dependency on Len Sassman, he made it have a dependency for all time on the last head of the Fed, whose name I've now spaced. What? No, not him. Anyway, the last head of the Fed, right? Because it's hilarious. Greenspan, thank you. There's actually an ASCII art picture. It's on the next. It would be on the next slide if I continued in columns. And Bitcoin forevermore has to calculate Alan Greenspan as part of the Bitcoin mining process. This is great. It's been very well proved. I didn't implement it because basically doing this as a dev thing is kind of rude to the Bitcoin devs. But for real-world productions, for real high-stakes thing, yeah, just go ahead and use Dan Kaminsky's code for the Bitcoin or the BitLen hack. So now we've solved all these problems we wanted to solve, right? We have, in essence, a big, large botnet, or all the pieces of it. And so when we put it together, it looks a lot like this. So everybody has a nice big IP tables firewall running on these little pink things. Then you've got the Tor client, which handles all connections to the external world. We have CouchDB shimmed through Nginx. We have the Mommy script, and that's all the harder it has to be, right? The cool thing is we've now built all of the methods and madness of a top-level first-order modern botnet like Aileron or Storm, and we wrote about 60 lines of code, most of it in the Mommy hook script. About 300 lines of configuration, but hey, right? You can't really whine too much about it. This is cool. Instead of having to pay Russian mobsters for 3 years to develop our botnets, we got to get away with all other people's code. And we can do that partially because we're not trying to infect Windows PCs with this. We don't have to hide from an existing supervisor or hypervisor. We take over the whole system because we own all the hardware. So we get to use all the benefits of the open source community, like the fact that severe network nerds have worked for 5 years on the CouchDB replication model. We can just use it for free because it's awesome. So now we have to test it. And for testing, I've turned to my friends in Sector 67, naturally, in order to do a lot of the missions we'll talk about next. So a mission is what I refer to as just a task. It's a task complete with who's supposed to do it, because Reticle has a grouping system to say only these nodes do it. It's complete with all the signatures, and there's a bunch of public-private key signing that you'd expect. I tried to do it all the right way, more or less. And it's also the data you have to send in order for it to process. So it's the whole big package, right? Why didn't I just call it a task? Well, because I worked for the military for too long. So it's a mission, right? It sounds very cool, right? Like sending shots down range and stuff. So to send a mission to Couch, all you have to do is find any node and execute a CouchDB put, which is, you can do it from curl if you really, really want to. It's kind of a pain to do it all because there's a timestamps and there's a bunch of signatures. You can do it manually, but there's also in the source code a cute little script that just calculates everything and shoves it in for you. But that's all you have to do is put it into CouchDB. If you're local on a node, you can do it without even SSL. If you're not local, you just have to have the client certificate and tell curl to use it. Pretty easy to send it in. And the neat part is that then, in order to get your data back, right, if you've infiltrated and then you want to exfiltrate all the packet captures you've been doing, every mission can just send its data back into the CouchDB. And on the next replication, we run replications on the Reticle test network about every 30 seconds to everybody. So it takes a couple of minutes. You'll pretty much have all the data back pretty quickly. And all you have to do is sit there. So if you've got one node, you don't need to know where all the rest of the nodes are. They'll just all handle it pretty much automagically for you. So we get infiltration and exfiltration all for free. Some missions we've written so far: a cute little blinking lights thing, Stalker, which is a fun project at Sector, basically saying, hey, so-and-so walked in, right? Listening for broadcasts of their MAC address off their phones. Okay, Creepy, which was kind of fun. So another member of Sector noticed, hey, most people in this hackerspace use online dating websites, right? Unnamed online dating websites, because I won't tell you which one because it's so hard to figure it out. And so they said, hey, you know what? If you look at the packets, they include a completely plenipotent cookie in every single packet to and from the unnamed dating website that includes all of your login information. And I'll bet if I sniff that, it will download all of your private messages for me. And then it worked. And so he wrote a cute little plugin for this. It just, it's just another mission, right? It sniffs, it listens to the unnamed dating website packet, and it downloaded a bunch of stuff. Good times were had by all, right? Don't worry, this is not actually running. Lord knows that source code isn't going anywhere because it's creepy, hence the name. But it is a simple proof of concept that this was really good at, because basically it doesn't even have to send you back the cookie, it can just send you back the resultant thing. Again, the power of having some actual processing power on the far end. There's also private web browsing, which is more kind of in the Occupy thing. And it was a proof of concept right now, but it works pretty well. Throw down one of these things, it finds local Wi-Fi, and then it uses the other USB thing in master mode to expose a connection, gives everybody Wi-Fi access, and routes everything through Tor. So you've got private, anonymous, deniable web browsing. And the cool thing is that since it just automatically scans for any Wi-Fi it can find, this will link together to itself. So if you throw down one way over the back of the room, and it's got wireless, like actual internet, and then I throw one here that can't see the wireless, but it can see the first node, it'll just link together in sequence. And you can do some configuration and some signaling to make it, not just keep routing multiple times through Tor, but that's all a pretty simple configuration thing. It works pretty easily. So right now you can take this and go rewire your entire Occupy protest. A couple other easy missions I haven't written yet, some of which I've just decided in the last couple of weeks to write. If you happen to be at Hope or know about the Why Special Agent Johnny Still Can't Encrypt talk, you know that supposed encrypted TLA conversations over their nice radio are actually unencrypted almost all the time. And so I'm not telling you that you can throw out 4 or 5 reticle nodes over a metro area and listen to all of what the FBI and NSA are talking about. But go read his paper. It's pretty awesome, actually. And since software-defined receivers now cost $25 because they found a cool TV dongle, this totally still fits within our budget, right? $25, it's the same as the Pogo Plugs, so it's expensive, but you can throw one on all of these and still keep it under $75. That's a pretty awesome result. Okay? And again, the data just gets shipped back, processed on board, and the resultant data gets transcribed and shipped back over CouchDB. You can ship back the audio files too. CouchDB doesn't have a file size limit. It'll just take longer. And the one thing to note is that missions aren't guaranteed to be exclusive. That is this. We're not EC2, right? Because this is your botnet, and it's not a public computing resource. So Reticle doesn't try and do any operations saying, hey, well, he's already using the Wi-Fi for sniffing right now, so you can't have it. So play nicely with yourself, as it were. I think that means something else, however. So roadmap, what are we going to do next and how you could help? The next steps for Reticle, simple. One, opportunistic replication. That is, right now it scans one time and assumes it's going to be in a static place. I want to be able to strap these things to cars and have them listen for Wi-Fi continuously and push their data when they get a chance to. MIT did this a few years ago in a cool project called Cartel for car telecommunications, but it means it's funny, right? But they won't release the source code. Boo. And I've asked several times, and I'm like, I'm an academic, and they still won't do it. They had to rewrite half the Linux kernel, however, for how fast they wanted it. We can talk about why they had to do that later. It wasn't a bad idea at the time. But ultimately, maybe it's not that helpful if they have to rewrite half the kernel, right? Because we already have a pretty specialized kernel. So we have to do that. Second problem is we have to do visualization for hordes of data. And third one, of course, is, well, hey, Raspberry Pi is out, and it really costs $25. Port it to that. I've started porting some of the code to Raspberry Pi. It works as you'd expect, right? It's all ARM anyway. And I want to write all of this early this fall, and here's why. This is a bike path doing wireless sniffing with one Fbomb node, okay? Through the city of Madison. This is Madison's 2 lakes. But I'm not looking for access points. This would be pretty dense for access points. There's 6,500 dots on this chart. I'm looking for wireless clients, because as you know, every couple seconds, your iPhone or whatever beacons out its MAC address. Well, it occurred to me, well, hey, if I had a few different nodes, one here and one here and one here and a couple moving, I wonder if I could play hide and seek, except without the people who are hiding knowing that they're hiding. And so this is going to be Spotlight. And Spotlight's going to be very simple. We're going to play hide and seek. We're not going to have any trained seekers. We're going to strap these things to a bunch of bicycle couriers, which are still used in Madison because it's a big bike town. And then we're just going to sniff all of the broadcast data all the time. And we're going to use a couple simple bits of geometry, which works really easily because Madison only has 2 dimensions, essentially. There's no hills in Wisconsin. Despite what their ski resorts will tell you. I'm from Montana. I know hills. These are not hills. So it works really well. Simple geometry works pretty effectively. We're going to pay bicycle couriers and bored students who we can give a $5 Amazon gift certificate to wear this thing on their belt for a day. We're going to bring them back. We're going to play hide and seek. Our estimate right now is that 20 nodes, given 12 hours, can find at least 10 moving targets. We're going to use 10 as the first exemplar. Okay, so 5 mobile and 5 static, and we're going to use the moving ones. They're going to be attached to people. We're just going to call you up. It's going to be like on down Periscope, right? You're going to have to confirm the firing solution because we're not going to just shoot you, but you get the idea. It's going to be pretty fun. And we're going to play over a 2-kilometer area to start, because why start with something easy? We're going to expand this on the second test to a 10 square kilometer area. And here's the deal. This is what I'm doing this fall. DARPA funding has expired. They're incredibly wonderful to me. I don't have funding to do this. I'm going to do this. And Sector 67 has already agreed to partner with us, getting all the attachments to the bicycle mounts. But if you are a funding agency and think this is a security project, which it totally is, then contact me. If you are a company and would like your stickers on everything I can see, contact me. And if you're a coder, more importantly, and you want to help with these projects, so we're solving cool new engineering problems based basically on, hey, that sounds fun, let's do that, then by all means contact me. All of this code will go up tomorrow on maliceafterthought.com, which is the domain there, because it turns out they will let you register anything as a corporation name these days. And it's all going to be posted on GitHub. And so it's going to be a big open source project. I did it in secret for 3 months. That got boring. I want to be able to post people to a website now. So it's going to be open source. You can run your own botnets. I'm happy to help port it to any other weird system you're doing on. The software is pretty simple because most of the components work on pretty much everything. And so it's a lot of configuration and a lot of just kind of lessons learned. And I'm happy to share it with anybody who wants. And I welcome, by the way, anyone who can show me how to reduce my attack surface or increase reliability or anything. By all means, tell me. I don't try and pretend that all these are the right solutions. They're the solutions I figured out how to do. And I'm not an expert in every category that Reticle works in. So that's pretty much it for Reticle and Fbomb. Thank you all, and I'll take questions. And if you ask questions, I have more things to throw at you. Yeah.
2 things.
Mm-hmm.
One is, once the Raspberry Pi actually becomes available where you can easily get one,
Mm-hmm.
do you think we'll try to go with that instead of Pogo Plugs? I'm assuming eventually you're going to stop making the hardware.
They will probably eventually, yes. And Raspberry Pi lifted its order restrictions last week. So we are at that point right now. I've got 2 of them already, and yeah, I think I could just place an order for 20 and get it in about a month.
I'm still waiting for that. Oh, I2P. Have you looked into using I2P on these?
I did look at using I2P. Exactly. It's a pain in the ass. It's not as performant. There are less nodes, and the security guarantees aren't as good. But that's why I didn't do it. So here, want a book? Catch. Yeah. Mm-hmm. $49. $49. Yeah. Honestly, paying Amazon with free shipping. That's the thing. I mean, seriously. And no stalking Craigslist, no stalking eBay to get special deals, just normal stuff. These are everyday prices. What a thing? I don't know what that is. Yeah. So I am not a lawyer yet, but even if I were a lawyer, we're not your lawyer. None of this stuff is illegal if you get permission to place the nodes or use the Wi-Fi, right? If you don't get that, then your local laws are going to vary. In some states, it's illegal to use open Wi-Fi, like Florida, where it's a felony, weirdly. I don't understand how that can possibly be constitutional, but it's not my job yet. It will be eventually. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you what's legal and what's not. We got permission from every place we drop these on the roof of, mostly because BAM is not subtle. Now, federal buildings are built with bricks on their roof, and therefore they don't hear it. But on just your normal business, they get weirded out if they hear thumps coming from their roof. Do you have a question? No. Any other questions? Yeah. I'm using a 3D printed case. I can show you if I can pull my bag. But there's another cool case that I just saw on their website called Pybo, which looks better built than my 3D printed case. Yeah. So this is pretty. So this right here is pretty low profile. You couldn't fit it in a 37 millimeter case, but you could still fit it in something you can launch with a big water balloon slingshot, which is I've launched it like that. Yeah, the case doesn't fit together quite right, but that's a me problem. What? Sorry? Well, right, but water balloon launcher. You've used a water balloon launcher. Oh, in terms of why I'm throwing. Yeah, well, he wanted to see it. Yeah, it's funnier if it hits you in the face. I try to throw only soft things. I threw you a book at you. I suppose you're a little bit annoyed. I threw it gently. But yeah, any other questions? Okay, I'm wearing bright purple, so if you want to come talk to me, I should be pretty easy to find. So thank you all very much.